It's only a $5 application in Michigan. So it's
I wish it was a scratch off. So like I could just scratch it and I'm like, damn it, not again. And we're back.
Hey,
HUNTR Podcast, episode 28.
Impressive. Is that right? Can we confirm?
I don't know.
Keep it right.
I think it sounds right.
Very nice.
Still July.
Yeah, we are into July. Man, I felt like a tangible shift when July came around here.
We've been going at it now.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
We're pushing.
We've got some bucks on camera. A couple.
Maybe even a shooter.
Some crackheads, too. Crushing 4 locos in front of our camera sites.
Wouldn't be a hunting lease experience if you didn't have some trespassers right out of the gate.
Yeah, that's all right. We're getting the ropes. I mean, it's the first day out there. It's beautiful weather. I understand why they're out, so we'll just keep.
Frankly, I was surprised they weren't Amish.
Well, they'd have been on mules.
I know,
not the mules that
not
we
the
saw.
John Deere.
Yeah,
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot of Amish over that way. They're further to the west.
Well, we got to spend a full day on the lease.
Ohio lease.
Colton and I, on the Ohio lease. Got cameras out. Feel good about that place.
Yeah, it was cool. I was encouraged by the amount of deer sign, even midsummer. It's a big timber property, so we're like, for sure, October, November is going to be good, but
a lot of
surprising amount of deer sign.
Yeah, even got a good buck on camera.
Yeah, he's weird. He's got like maybe we'll throw a picture of the podcast or something, but it's got a real goofy right side, kind of just
some sort of pedicle or antler
kind of like a fork, and then he's got a big
heavy foresight.
Left side would be a big, he would have been a mainframe 8.
He's got a lot of growth left too, I bet.
I think so too.
Yeah, it'll be a good buck.
Is that first shooter? We got some in Illinois, but
yeah, we did. It's funny, man. It's been 90s and dry. We finally get this big front to come through, which got us rain in the Dakotas as well. Speaking of rain, just water dripping off of your face.
A little dribble on the lips.
and it just opened up. There were probably 2 good bucks that came up that bean trail in Illinois.
We finally got that, just the whole country. I think that we were talking to Ben. The Dakotas got about a 1/4 inch the other day. A little further west is getting some more today. I think they're calling for. Yeah, Illinois has been wet, and we have been too. It's been
just got to break those. I mean, when you get those streaks of, even if it's mid 80s and just hot and summer, like those deer just don't move. Yeah. I mean, they're just locked down. You don't see them. They're not hitting the mineral sites. I wrote Jeff Sturgis yesterday. We were talking about stuff, and I was like, Jeff, honestly, kind of really weird question. I said, I'm just not seeing any deer hitting my mineral sites. Like, I'd like the same doe and fawn. Okay, they're coming back and they're hitting this thing. But other than that, like, not a lot. And then last night, that front comes through, and just like that, it's like, oh, there's a buck, there's multiple bucks. So it's just that time of year.
What was his take?
He didn't respond.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, I was texting him. He wasn't. Yeah.
I was texting Jeff. Jeff was busy. He didn't respond.
I see.
Actually, it was when I was so I got hit. I put out all those new stealth. So we got the new Stealth Cam Fusion X in, which was awesome. So I went out and I was putting those stealth cams up, and it was like, of course, weather guys like, yeah, front's gonna come through. You're gonna get these storms, and it'll be fine, right? So front comes through, we get storms, and I go out there, and like I'm in the middle of this field, and it's like lightning and torrential down. So I like run to, probably not the smartest thing, like this little metal box blind that's on the ground, and I just sit in it for like an hour.
It was metal? It was just a frame. It was a hub style, right?
No. This was one of the old box blinds they took down and just put on the ground for a ground blind. It's solid metal. Oh. Which probably wasn't the smartest in a lightning storm, but so I'm just in there. That's when I was texting Jeff. I'm like, hey,
Yeah.
Just
smart move.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what I would have done.
But like on my way home, so I got 4 or 5 cameras out. On my way home, there was probably a 3-year-old.
Yeah.
Hitting.
Yeah. You got a lot of deer moving on the mountain. I've seen that.
Just like that.
Yeah. They, oh, shoot. I forget what I was going to say, but anyways, yeah. We got a bunch of cameras. Oh, I was going to say that rain, I think, is probably helping to wash some of our scent away.
Yeah.
On the lease. I mean, we were in there stinking it all up.
We were sweaty.
It was you, me, Colton. Man, the road system on that place is
awesome.
Immaculate. Like the landowner's done such a good job of keeping access up on that property. But there was one part of it that I knew we wanted to really get to, and it is where we found most of the buck sign, and that's where we got that picture at too. That it was worth walking, but we got some ticks in the BH probably.
I'm still pulling them out, I think. I think they've just established a home colony.
A colony.
They've
colonized your butthole.
That sounds about right. And they've been bad this year, man. And even in Kentucky, we were hiking through there, and the kids and I came out, and Harlan's got a tick on his ball sack, and the kid didn't even flinch when I pulled it off, and it's like, God, man, gotta
keep the equipment clear.
Yeah, and it's just just do what you gotta do, But yeah, it's been bad with ticks. So if you're out in the woods, best be checking.
Mm-hmm.
Best be checking. So we got another guest today.
Mm-hmm. I want to clarify too. There's not a NASCAR driver named Chad Stewart, is there?
I don't think so.
Okay, it just sounds like a NASCAR kind of name, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm trying to think. No, not NASCAR. Sounds like it, but not.
There's a something Stewart, right?
Tony
Stewart.
Mm-hmm.
Oldie,
mm-hmm.
but goodie.
Oldie but goodie.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's not the guy that killed somebody, right?
Yes, it is.
Is it? Ooh.
Accident.
Ooh.
Accident.
Okay.
We're probably still under investigation.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. No relation.
No relation.
We're pretty sure.
No relation. Yeah. No, Chad Stewart, deer and elk biologist for Michigan Department of Natural Resources. Thought it'd be a good one. Chad and I go way back. We worked together at the Smithsonian, which I'm sure we'll bring up, and Chad's a Penn State guy as well. But I thought kind of similarly to what we did with Matt and Pennsylvania Game Commission, the Michigan DNR has a lot on their hands with, again, a very dense deer hunting, population.
Yeah.
And so Chad's kind of taken a little different approach, which is what I want to get in with him. He actually has created and Chad will tell you he's not technology inclined, but he basically created a public figure page for himself of where he purely is that outreach and communication with the general hunting public in Michigan.
On behalf of the state, essentially.
As a deer biologist. And
cool.
He's kind of done it as hey, I'm going to do this. If you have a problem with it, let me know, but otherwise I'm going to do this.
Help me out with geography. Michigan is just north of
Indiana and Ohio.
Okay. So just northwest of us here.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep. Northwest of us. Kind of looks
bordered by the lakes on the north?
Yes.
Okay. Erie and Michigan, I assume?
Erie, Michigan, Superior.
And Superior. Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then
Sweet.
You got the...
Big state, too, right?
Then you got the UP.
Oh, yeah. Oh, the
Yoopers.
Yeah. There's no deer up there, are there? Barely.
Well, we'll ask Chad about that.
Okay.
So...
Cool. Let's get him on.
Yeah, let's bring him in. Hey, Chad.
Hey, fellas. How's it going?
Good, man. How are you?
Doing good.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Welcome.
We kind of preluded this podcast talking to Chad, and he said that the Michigan mosquito hatch has just occurred, which has probably kept everybody indoors.
Yeah, the old saying, June showers bring July mosquitoes.
Hadn't heard that one. Yeah, it sounds right, though.
Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good.
Yeah.
We have got a lot of rain here in the past couple of weeks, too, which I am grateful for. I wonder why we're not seeing the mosquito hatches down here necessarily, or the cicada that they were calling for.
Yeah, we didn't get any cicada hatch in this area. Did you guys get any cicadas up there?
It's spotty. I think we're just a little bit north of their range, that 17-year hatch that's supposed to be, but there's places around, I think, Ann Arbor that were pretty wild with numbers, but I think most of it was a lot further south. So some of the old stomping grounds I was in, southern Indiana, I keep in touch with some of those folks, and they were going nuts with it. So
really?
Apparently it's just deafening. So, yeah.
Wow.
Weston is in that area, right?
Mm-hmm.
Any word from him?
I don't know.
I feel like we'd have heard about it.
It does seem very hit or miss. I know there's parts of central and western Kentucky that are hammered down with it, but where my place is in the eastern part of Kentucky, I haven't seen any.
And I don't know where it's at with it. I don't know if I don't think it's supposed to last all summer long. I think it's peaking in part of the year. I'm not a cicadaologist, so I don't know
really?
a lot about it.
We're going to have to refilm this podcast.
Sorry, yeah, it's a disappointment.
Jeremy, I thought you told me this guy knew cicadas. Come on.
That's the whole point of the podcast. Now we're throwing it to the wind.
Well, Chad, do you want to kind of start by introducing yourself and just tell us, obviously we know that you're from Michigan, but tell us a little bit about your role there and maybe how you want to know Jeremy too. Be cool.
Maybe.
I'd prefer to leave the last part out if
that's
possible.
Up to you. That's up to you.
Yeah, I was hoping that wouldn't even come up.
We
honestly.
put that in a filing drawer a long time ago.
Oh, so you guys are meeting for the first time.
Yes,
right.
This
Yeah,
is
if we can edit that out, that would be great. No, my name is Chad Stewart. So my role in Michigan is I work for the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. And my title's a mouthful, but it is a pretty cool job. It's the Deer, Elk, and Moose Management Specialist for the agency. And I've been up here outside of the Lansing area for going on 7 years now.
And before that, Chad, you were in Indiana?
Yeah, I had a similar job in Indiana. So I started off in 2004 with the Indiana Department of Natural Resources as their deer research biologist. And then after about a year, their management biologist retired. That position wasn't filled. So I served as just the general deer biologist or management and research biologist, whatever you want to call it, for about 7 years. So between Michigan and Indiana, I'm about 15 years in sort of leading deer management programs here in the Midwest.
Yeah. And originally you're a Pennsylvania boy, right?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Pennsylvania. Grew up in Franklin County, just outside of Harrisburg, so specifically Chambersburg area. And went to Penn State, lived there for 22 years or so. And then went and got a graduate degree at the University of Illinois. And then in between that time and my first job with Indiana, I spent 3 years in Northern Virginia, which is where I got to meet Jeremy, working for it's now called the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute. But when I was there, it was the Conservation and Research Center.
And a lot of people don't. I still get this, Chad. I'm sure you do too. Like somehow it'll come up in a conversation and people will be like, "You work for the Smithsonian doing deer stuff?" And I'm like, "Yes." And they're like, "Oh, I thought that was just a museum."
Yeah, it's because it takes people aback, right?
Yeah.
So for people who aren't familiar with it, it's an amazing facility. So obviously everybody's familiar with the Smithsonian Institute, the National Zoo. They're all sort of connected. But what they wanted to do and how that facility was originally developed in Front Royal, Virginia, was essentially a captive breeding program for endangered species. So even when we were there, they had, God, Jeremy, you can help me out. They had several different types of endangered cranes. They had red pandas.
Yep.
They had tree kangaroos. They had clouded leopards.
We had a bunch of different ungulates too.
Oryxes,
oryx.
Kowalski horses, tufted deer. So it was amazing
from Lord
to
of the
work
Rings.
and live in that environment. But they, this facility was designed for that, but it was not designed to be open to the public. So they built a huge buffer around it. They purchased a lot of land, and ultimately there's a lot of that land was used for obviously growing some of the food for like the hoof stock, whether it was alfalfa or bamboo for the red pandas. But there's a lot of, they understand the role of conservation and science, and it doesn't have to be this exotic animal, zoo sort of setting. There's a lot of conservation work that can happen, locally as well. So they had a lot of research there looking at, just deer management, invasive species, just a whole bunch of stuff. They had researchers coming in from different universities and utilizing those resources and those facilities for work. So it was, I can't speak for Jeremy, but I thought it was an amazing place to spend some of your youth and get exposed to some of that, not only research, but just other disciplines of science that was going on. And it was a pretty cool, pretty fun time.
I think it was crazy, man. I mean, it first of all, it was a beautiful property. I mean, to live in Front Royal, Virginia, I mean, yeah, you've got DC not too far away, but you're literally right there at Shenandoah National Park and stuff. And, the facility itself for just somebody who wants to be outside like me was really cool because, I mean, we did a lot of telemetry work, that we had a lot of collared does and stuff. We did some clover traps, which were basically like big box traps that we were trying to trap essentially deer in and then put them down. And
so
do
it was
measurements
primarily
and stuff.
deer at that point then. This is So
that's
now
what
you're deer, elk, and moose, but this was back in the day.
Chad and I were basically working on the deer side of it. You know, I think the two things that really kind of were my first my first introductions to as like somebody who wanted to be part of deer management and deer biology was, number one, we had a very dense black bear population. And Chad, you can probably correct me if I'm wrong on it, but I thought that was a really clear example of how detrimental black bears could be on fawn recruitment. And I wouldn't say that it was necessarily natural because of the way that we had the property set up and there were some fences and some things like that, but because it was essentially unhunted and it was so high population of black, like, I mean, we had like very low recruitment rates for the number of deer that we had on that property. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah. You also got to take in mind some of the research we were doing too with the deer, and it was some, and a lot of hunters are going to cringe at this, but it was a contraceptive program essentially. That was really gathering steam back in the early 2000s. That piece for management of abundant populations. The researcher that we were working with, we were basically. You were seasonal. I was a little bit more long term because I got a lot more gray hair than you, but I'm a little bit older. But
you brought it up, not me.
But that was one of the things that he was sort of tasked to do, is sort of evaluate that technique in terms of managing, because the area was closed to hunting.
Sure.
I think that's important to point out that this was an area that was not able to be managed by hunters, even though certainly that's my personal preference as an individual, as a hunter, and certainly as a game manager. That it was just not possible in those areas. And there are places like that exist in this world that have deer, and they just view it as a safety concern, or for whatever reason, they cannot get hunters into that area. So they tried to evaluate this technique. So, some of the recruitment issues we saw were because of that. I think ultimately the point of that research was to show that it works really well individually on deer, that vaccination program, that contraceptive program that we had, but from a management of an overall population, it just doesn't really work very well.
Yeah.
So,
and we looked at that at Penn State too. Actually, I think it was either that year before I had come down to you guys, or that was part of one of my independent research projects I was doing at Penn State when I was coming out of there, is that we were looking at that from a deer pen facility at Penn State and looking at the data of the immunocontracetives and what was working, what wouldn't, and found the same thing, right? Like, there were some successes there, very individualized, success here, failure here. And so when you're trying to put that together from an entire herd standpoint, and this is important for a lot of, suburban and urban America, where there are these, extreme over deer, populations, how do you control them? Contraceptives in that early 2000 time period were the hot button topic. In fact, there were a lot of places, was it Long Island that actually was doing some stuff, or Jersey that was doing some stuff that actually was trying to apply it at the population level?
Yeah, that's a whole other story. I know there's some. So there's the contraceptive piece that you can basically inject a drug into, and there's two different kinds of drugs into the animal, and it, depending on which drug you inject, it alters their reproductive cycle essentially. The other piece, but that's one of the challenges that was identified with that sort of early on, is that wears off. Deer can live a really long time, especially in a non-hunted area. Those sort of vaccines were good for a year, maybe a couple years at best, and then they wear off. Some of the newer rage that has been seen is focusing on sterilization, which is really a surgical tubal ligation or ovarectomy, and that's obviously a lot more permanent. You don't have to find that animal again and give it a booster, and so that, I think, Jeremy, what you're talking about is what I think Long Island's been experimenting with in recent years.
And I mean, even with that, we didn't have too much experience with it, what we were doing, but I mean, the amount of stress that those animals go under, even when you sedate them and capture them and stuff, I mean, you're always going to have capture myopathy and issues like that too. So Yeah, it's an interesting topic, and I won't say that it's still not a hot button topic, but it feels like it's kind of gone by the wayside a little bit, Chad. Like I remember even in the late 90s, early 2000s, you talk about some of the sharpshooter programs that were brought into the areas, and it just seemed like it was more of a
bobbly swagger action.
Yeah, it was just more of a hot button that people like. This was needing to happen, right? And I don't know if it was because people just didn't want the hunting community in it.
I would have been younger, but I remember people. It was like it was a big deal, just deer populations and stuff. Doesn't seem like it gets talked about very much. It also seems like, over time you invest so much time trying to figure out how to do something. Like, ultimately just let them hunt.
Yeah, and I mean, you see more of that controlled hunt aspect in some of these highly
that has
populated
happened. When I
areas.
heard about that not that long ago, like a year or two ago, around
Boys Park
Pittsburgh
and stuff.
area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, did they end up doing like a
controlled hunt?
Controlled hunt, yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
That's how you do it. That's how you kill a deer.
Well, I think they're just seeing that that's starting to be kind of the easiest and most cost-effective way to do it.
I think that's the big thing. It's pretty cost prohibitive, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about sterilizing a deer. I mean, don't quote me on this, but on average, you're looking at maybe $1,000.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of money. And you know what? If you're having problems with overabundant deer, the deer's still there.
That deer's still there, right? I mean, it doesn't
still could be
anything.
causing problems. It's tough to swallow for a community to fork over $1,000 to sterilize a deer, and then a month later it gets bumped on the road.
Yeah.
And it's still contributing to potential conflicts that may have initially, help them get to that decision to try to do something. So you're right. So we have a community here in Michigan that has experimented with that recently. Ann Arbor, they've done some sterilization, but it was done in conjunction with a sharpshooting removal program, with the idea being that the lethal side of things get your numbers way down, and then the non-lethal side of things keeps does in that area at really low densities, and maybe prevents that sort of vacuum effect from other does coming in from outside of that area and refilling. And that's still sort of being, I haven't seen a final report on that. That's still being, I guess, evaluated in terms of whether or not that's a successful way to go. But it's hard to manage deer completely non-lethally. You have to have some sort of lethal approach, and obviously the most accepted and cost efficient way to do it is with hunters.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if you're looking at this or addressing this because you have a overabundant deer population, whether you find a successful contraceptive or sterilization program, you still have too many deer, right? You still have to address that overabundance right now that's staring you in the face. Chad, are sharpshooting programs like White Buffalo and stuff still around? Are they still doing stuff like that?
Yeah, they're still around. There's a couple other ones. That's White Buffalo is one of the more well-known and well-successful ones. They're kind of a national group, but there's a couple smaller independent ones, and there's federal programs. So we really work closely in Michigan, especially for some of our disease work, but even some of our communities, we give them at least a contact, and they decide who they want to go with. USDA Wildlife Services does a lot of wildlife management stuff. So they're really well known for a lot of airport work, but it's important to note that certainly in Michigan we've got a great relationship with them, and I think a lot of states do too, especially for some of the disease work or other sort of nuisance wildlife work. They do that. They're in that line of business as well.
So I guess on a disease standpoint in Michigan, Chad, what are you guys dealing with the most right now, or what's kind of the hot button topic there?
So the hot button in Michigan and everywhere is chronic wasting disease.
Yep.
So we've identified chronic wasting disease in Michigan starting in 2015, and we've done surveillance and done a lot of surveillance over the past 6 years or so. And we've identified about 200 positive animals spread across 9 counties. 208 of them are in the lower peninsula. We did find one in the upper peninsula, right along the Wisconsin border. And we've done some surveillance up there since then and haven't found any more. So at least encouraging. So that's the one that really takes up a lot of our time right now, and I think a lot of states are dealing with. In Michigan, we have the added pleasure of another disease called bovine tuberculosis that has been around and established for a much longer time. So bovine tuberculosis is a bacterial disease, and that is completely zoonotic. So other things besides deer can pick it up, whereas CWD is really a specifically ungulate specific disease that we're aware of. For bovine TB, the biggest impact there is with our cattle industry.
Right.
So you've got that TB going back and forth between deer and cattle. It's essentially serving as a reservoir in our deer population. And then as you get intermixing between deer and cattle, it can get passed to cattle and certainly vice versa. It doesn't really, I think, affect, it's a respiratory disease. Doesn't seem to really impact their population dynamics that we've seen a whole lot, whereas there are long-term projections that CWD can do that. But we don't want it to get further spreading because the impact to our cattle industry can be enormous. And if it continues to spread, it could have statewide implications rather than like a regional impact.
Right. And so I would assume because of its cattle effect, you guys are probably having to work with USDA pretty closely on that kind of stuff too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I mean, that's the interagency stuff that, so I guess for everyone listening on our side, kind of give us the framework of Michigan DNR. We kind of brought up that we talked to the Pennsylvania Game Commission, and obviously, they have a certain amount of impact from a harvest of game animals and statewide, but, you still have the Fisheries Department, Pennsylvania Fish and Boat, that's separate. You still have Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resource, which is managing state forest land and stuff different. How is Michigan set up from a DNR standpoint in terms of the natural resources there?
Yeah, so Michigan's a little bit different than Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania is almost kind of unique in the way it's set up. But Michigan, I think, has a little bit more of a traditional setup. So you've got what I would call sort of the umbrella agency, which is the DNR, and under that you've got different divisions. So for me, I'm in a wildlife division. So that's essentially management and oversight of all the state game lands and the species specific recommendations where our wildlife biologists are located or are stationed. It's where our species specialists, we've got technicians, we've obviously got a lot of support staff and whatnot. So you've got wildlife, you've got a fisheries division, you've got forestry division. Obviously, you've got law enforcement division as well, where our conservation officers are. But also under that, you've got, and I'm going to miss some of these divisions, but you've got our state parks and recreation. That's a separate division, and you've even got. I'm probably going to butcher the name because I don't deal with a lot in my job, but it's like the sort of the mineral and mining type thing. So, just those sort of resource things. So, and I'm sure there's probably a few that I'm missing, but it's all sort of overseen by a central figurehead, which is our DNR director. And obviously a lot of the regulations that are approved, are not just made internally, although the director does have authority on certain things. It has to go through an independent board, which is our Natural Resources Commission. And that's made up of 7 individuals who are appointed by either the present or previous governor to serve as sort of the checks and balance for the agency.
So in terms of here in our state, obviously we've got a lot of even though we can make recommendations as the Game Commission, right? State legislatures are actually setting a lot of those laws. Is the commission essentially being that board of authority, or is there still a state legislature process there?
You've got both. So our Natural Resources Commission in Michigan is essentially, and I'm just mostly speaking from the deer perspective, since this is a deer-focused perspective. They're really focused on essentially what is the manner and method of take.
Yep.
So anything with hunting seasons, equipment use, season day, anything like that. If it's revolved around the taking of an animal, that is sort of under their purview.
Okay.
That's not to say that our state legislature couldn't propose and adopt something in that vein. They certainly can do that. It just sort of cuts the legs out from what would be our Natural Resources Commission, and so far they've had a pretty good relationship on whose role is who.
Right.
As you get into things like Hunter Orange and how much to wear, or some states are either experimenting or kicking the tires on this Hunter Pink thing. That does not go under our Natural Resources Commission. That would be a legislative decision, because that doesn't really involve the manner or method of take. That's just simply how you dress as you go out to hunt,
right?
Which is obviously a safety concern, but it's a separate entity. So I guess to answer your question, things can be developed from a deer management standpoint in the legislature. It's kind of a dangerous way to go, because once it's in there, it's really hard to change. And if it's the wrong decision, it's really difficult to get changed. Whereas under the Natural Resources Commission, you have a lot more flexibility. We meet with them honestly every month. That's not to say deer regulations are up every month, although sometimes they seem like they are.
It's the one though. Yeah.
Within 2 to 3 months time, you can have a regulation proposed, heard, public comment, and decided on and for change. So, it's a protection way to keep against a really bad regulation if it were to be brought forward.
And does that give you guys some more flexibility, I guess, on maybe like a regionalized, or I don't know if it's county wise or how you guys are managing deer from a state level perspective, but because you're meeting that frequently, can you be a little bit more detailed or precise on how you're applying different management goals and harvest recommendations and stuff?
We can. So, historically what we've done is, and we don't change it that frequently, because ideally what we like to see is we present a proposal that's hopefully supported, and then you let it play out, right? Because if you have a bad year, 2020 was a really interesting year for a lot of reasons, but certainly in wildlife management as well, because what we found was that the historic trend of hunter decline sort of all of a sudden changed. People went out and hunted a lot more. And if you were to make a decision just based off of 2020's data, it could not be telling you the true impact, because there are other variables that are changing. So it does give us a lot more flexibility, and we don't like to change regulations that much. And I say that after several years of changing regulations quite a bit because of things, but our desire is to bring forward a regulation, let it play out for, preferably 3 years, and then try to reevaluate it once you have several years of data to determine if the trend is going the way you want it to go.
Did you guys see an increase in harvest in 2020 for deer?
Yeah, we just got our preliminary results back in. So Michigan is a little different, and we are going to go to a mandatory registration next year. At least we're going to propose that. But right now, the way we do it is through postseason harvest surveys, and that takes a long time to get entered and analyzed. So here we are sitting in July, and we're just finding out the results of last year's hunting season. But yeah, we were up. Actually, it was pretty incredible. Our antlerless harvest was up about 29%.
Wow.
Last year. It was a huge number. And we crested, I think it was 410,000 deer harvested in Michigan last year.
Holy cow.
Was up from about 370. So
does that mean, Chad, that when deer are harvested, they don't need to be checked right away?
Correct.
You don't have to call it in or anything?
Nope, you don't have to call it in. As long as it's tagged, you take it to the processor, you take it home. As long as you're tagged, you're good.
And so they're coming up. I would say that there's some sort of algorithm that they're then taking those postseason surveys in based on how many people get them, how many people are actually completing them.
The percentage of people has to be like half of people that are filling it out after the fact.
So it's sent out. So everything, it's all statistics, right?
Yep.
So we send it to it's our postseason harvest survey. It's a random design.
Is it required? Is it required?
Nope. So we send it to the survey goes out to about 62,000 people. It probably gets returned by half, if not less. So we get surveyed. So But what we do is everybody that fills out a number, like Jared, you'll say I shot 2 deer. Jeremy, you'll say I shot 1 deer. Others in the room will say, I shot 0 or I shot 4. And it becomes all right, there's 4 people, they shot X number of deer. So it's an estimate.
Yep.
And when you have an estimate, you have a confidence interval built around it. So everything that we provide in the harvest report shows the estimate and the confidence interval surrounding it. And we've liked that historically because you have that confidence range around it. We hear a lot of criticism from our hunters that say, well, how do you know? Like nobody surveyed me, like what was harvested. But in talking with other states, what we find is that a lot of states don't even estimate how many people don't register their harvest.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people that go out and harvest their deer legally, but they don't follow through with the registration piece.
Yep.
And if you don't know what that number is, it could lead to some faulty estimates. So what it comes back to is you have a minimum reported harvest for states that do that. And it's not that big a deal if what I call the non-compliance doesn't change year to year. If non-compliance is 5% every year, no big deal. But if you have like a varying range of non-compliance, like 5%, this year 5% of people didn't report their harvest, but next year 20% of the people didn't report their harvest because they didn't like something the agency did that year, and this is their way of like.
Well, even think about weather. Like, I mean, if it's pouring down rain and I shoot my buck, the odds of me checking it in right then are probably not good because I don't want to be getting my phone out and trying to check this thing in and do all this. I just want to get that damn thing out of the woods, or it's dark or whatever. But if you send that postseason survey, at the same time every year to the same amount of people or thereabouts.
I think so in the state of Ohio, I'm pretty sure you're supposed to
check it before you move
it, but I'm gonna say 70-80% of people probably check it at the house.
Same with Pennsylvania. I mean, historically,
back to the house.
It used to be mail-in Pennsylvania. Now you have a digital aspect, but you used to take your card that came with your license and fill it out and mail it in. And I think it was like south of 40% at one point in time.
Yep. You just don't get a lot of participation with it. So, and again, that's fine if the level of people not participating is consistent year to year because you have the same trend. But if you're changing that variable and you don't know what that variable is, then the numbers that you're having reported this year compared to next year can give you incorrect information with how your deer herd's going. So it's a really slippery slope on how to go. The problem with the way that we do it is if we'd had this conversation 2 weeks ago, I couldn't have given you an estimate.
Right, because you didn't
what
have
our harvest was. And at that point, nobody cares what the harvest was in 2020. Everybody's looking ahead they've got trail cam pictures going on now. They're looking ahead to, forward. So, in the age of technology, you want information quickly. Yeah,
we want it now.
So we're moving that direction. And then what we're going to do is basically develop 2 estimates. We'll have our real-time estimate that, like probably Pennsylvania and certainly Kentucky and a lot of other states do. And we can talk about that right away to see if, harvest up, harvest down, whatever. And then we'll do a much smaller postseason survey that goes out to people, and that'll serve as our correction.
That's like running cell cams instead of running
regular
cams.
Well, I guess, Chad, how does that affect? Because obviously, all right, data, now you just got your estimate with your confidence interval around it in July. How does that affect recommendations or doe allocations, antlerless allocations for the 2021-22 season? Because you just got it; it's July.
Yeah. So a lot of times you're working with not the most recent year's information. So what you have to rely on is generally the trend. Yeah. What you've been seeing over the past couple of years, and then.
Which is tough because you get a curveball like 2020.
I call that a pretty big weakness.
It explodes because it's a false sense of accurate data because 2020, and this is something we're seeing even on the hunting industry side, Chad, is that a lot of people think because 2020 was what it is and all these people got reintroduced to hunting and fishing and everything else that we're going to see that again in 21. I'll be on the record to say I don't think we will. I don't think it'll be back to maybe 2019, but it sure as hell isn't going to be anywhere close to 2020. And so whether you're a company building your financial data off of 2020 or you're an agency looking at your deer harvest and recommendations, like 2020 is, I almost say like put a blinder on it and go back to 19, right? Because it's so much of an outlier that we can't reproduce it, and it likely won't be reproduced unless something happens again with COVID and pandemic and shutdowns, in 21 and 22.
Yeah, I don't know how many people want to repeat 2020.
Nope, for sure.
I mean, it was a great year for a lot of agencies. Obviously, there was a lot more participation, a lot more interest in getting outdoors. I can't speak for a lot of other states, but our state parks were jammed up all year long. Just people getting outside, and from an agency standpoint, we want to try to capitalize on that. We want to get people, like this newfound love affair that maybe they forgot about.
Yep.
To keep them active and participating in the outdoors, whether it's through a consumptive lens with hunting or fishing, or just being outside and camping and whatever, geocaching, bird watching, whatever. The more people that are outside and enjoying nature, I think it makes for a much stronger, community.
Can we use that as a pivot point? Because I think a lot like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, Michigan's got just a super rich deer hunting tradition. I mean, it's one of those states that when you think about deer hunting, like Michigan is up there as just that rich tradition of family, friends, deer hunting, deer camps. I know for a long time, people started to kind of look at, it was like here in Pennsylvania, like we fled to the big woods. Like I assume a lot of people fled from Michigan to northern Michigan and the UP and stuff. Has that started to die down like it has, like even in our state of Pennsylvania, like not as many people are going up to the northern tier and hunting the big woods?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that really appealed to me in coming to Michigan, because it's the tradition, and it's the history, and it's like the size that I'm used to in Pennsylvania, right? Yep. So they're actually, both states have a lot of similarities, but you're absolutely right. Like so if you go back like 50, 60 years ago, and into the 60s, what you had to do in Michigan to harvest a deer was go into the Upper Peninsula. You had to get north of the bridge. You had to get in there because that's where the deer were. And that has been completely like a 180 turn, today. So now our Upper Peninsula has probably some of the lowest deer densities. I should hedge that, because there are places in the UP that are still fantastic for deer hunting, have a lot of deer. That south central part in Menominee County, right around Wisconsin and Escanaba area, there's a ton of deer, but they get a lot more milder winters. But as you get closer to that Lake Superior shoreline, and we have deer there that are, we call them obligate, migrators. They have to move out, and it's usually by sometime in November and almost certainly December, depending on when the snows start coming. Otherwise, they're going to be, they're not going to make it. There's just too much snow. And so the numbers are really small. So again, to put this into perspective, I think I'm going to try to remember here. So I think we harvested about 30,000 deer throughout the entirety of the Upper Peninsula last year in 2020. And just the southern lower part of Michigan, we were well over 200,000 deer.
Wow.
So, if we harvested 400, like what I say earlier, 410,000 deer in the state of Michigan, 30,000 of them are coming from the UP, and that's it.
And I mean, that's, maybe not necessarily just land size, but thinking about deer country, like it is wooded, timbered deer country in that UP.
It's big woods. Yeah. It's a lot. So it's a completely different deer hunting experience, right? So if you're down in where I am, if you go out in the country, you're looking at, it's a little marshy, patches of woods, but a lot of agriculture, beans, corn, whatever, some pasture. It's your classic like Midwest setting. Mm-hmm. And the further north that you go, we always use our hand for Michigan. So once you get right about the knuckles, it starts getting into more big woods. And then certainly as you get above the lower peninsula into the upper peninsula, you get a lot of public land. You get a whole different suite of, animals that you're picking up that you can see on your tree stand. You start getting into areas where you can start seeing fisher, marten, certainly in the northern lower, you got porcupine. I mean, And one of the big things right now in the Upper Peninsula, there's a lot of discussion about wolf management. So we've got wolves up there. We've gotten mountain lions or cougars on trail cameras, and we report that. So, if you're a deer and you want a place to hang out, I don't know if like the UP is the place where you actively choose to go. It's a harder life.
And is that where you're seeing from an effect of those kind of populations and density kind of coming down, a combination of predators? I assume, like being big land, I mean, I'm sure there's still some regulations and restrictions around how those timber areas are managed from a purely mature standpoint or early successional habitat. Obviously, winters seem like that's a huge effect in your area from a winter kill severity index type of thing.
Yeah, so you've got to include predators in the conversation. It's certainly what's on a lot of people's mind. A lot of the fingers immediately go to wolves, but you can't we've got about, on estimate, I think it's between 600 and 700 wolves in the Upper Peninsula.
Can you shoot a wolf in Michigan?
You cannot. They are obviously wolves are, and this is a tough one to get into because it's very wolf management is really political.
It's more political than wildlife management.
Everybody says like, oh man, the deer guy, I wouldn't want to be the deer guy because it's so political. And it's like, well, I know the guy that works with wolves. And I don't know if I'd want to be that dude. Yeah. He's a saint, man. But it's real. So right now, no, you can't. Like obviously Wisconsin held a hunt, I think earlier in the year, as soon as the endangered species ruling came in. We've been a lot more deliberate. We want to update our wolf management plan. We know that some of this stuff is going to be tied up in courts probably for a while.
Sure.
We would, I think, like to see a little bit more stability before we go that way. That being said, there's a lot of people that are really upset that something's not happening right away, sooner rather than later.
I assume places like Michigan State. I mean, I know Michigan State's got a pretty strong wildlife program that they're doing ongoing research in cooperation with you guys.
Yeah, we've got a great relationship with Michigan State University. We've got specifically, their fisheries and wildlife department. There's a couple of outstanding professors in there, both from the field side of things and the human dimension side of things that we tap into their resources quite a bit. And we've got a couple ongoing projects from forest management, snowshoe hare, several with CWD. There is a wolf one, that modeling thing that's going on. It's really nice, and Michigan's set up really well. That Michigan State University is right next to, is in East Lansing.
Yep.
Our capital is Lansing, where a lot of our statewide individuals and our executives are located. So it really fosters that conversation and dialogue really easily in terms of developing research projects and communicating the research between the experts that are designed to do it and then the ones that are tasked for the management side of things.
So you asked about season. I was curious, is there a moose or an elk season in Michigan?
There is an elk season. So we've had elk we just celebrated 100 years of elk, having elk in Michigan.
Wow.
So we have about 1,200 elk in Michigan.
Is that in the UP?
Nope. Elk are all in our lower peninsula,
really?
Actually. Yeah. So again, I'm going to pull out the hand. They're really northern up here. So we've got some really expansive forests in that area called the Pigeon River Forest, Pigeon River Country Forest. It's about as wild in the lower peninsula as you can get. And that was one of the initial sites for the release, like I said, over 100 years ago. Elk have been doing great. We try to manage the conflicts outside of that area because there is agriculture outside of there. Mm-hmm. It does abut up to where we have TB in our deer. And we have had TB in our elk, but it's still pretty rare. It doesn't seem to be easily spread. But our elk program, I think, is really, really successful. I think we kind of flip-flop back and forth between Pennsylvania, between having the second largest herd east of the Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Kentucky is way above every other state. That's on another world. But so we do have an elk season. I think we have 260 tags available. It's only for residents.
That's pretty good, though. 260 tags. That's fairly substantial.
We do. It's 260 for statewide drawing. I think we have about 30,000 people that draw for it.
Wow.
So we obviously have to limit it quite a bit. And then on top of that 260, we have to allocate an additional 10% for tribal members based on our agreement that we have with the sovereign nations here in Michigan. So our elk herd's doing great. It's been plateaued at that level, which is actually above management goal, but we're not really having any conflict issues with them, and we keep bumping up our tags a little bit every couple of years. So I think all's well is on our elk herd. Moose we do not have a season on, and our moose are exclusively in the UP. We have on estimate about 500 moose in our core area, and then we probably have another 100 or so that are bouncing around the rest of the UP that are outside of that core area. And we've done some modeling in the past, and we could probably hold a very limited like bull hunt, but the margin for error between going from like a sustainable population and crashing it is really small. So we just haven't been able to move forward with that just yet.
Well, and I would say if you guys got like a really severe winter when you held that hunt, it could throw it, clear down the wrong path. You just can't predict it.
You can't. And so, the model shows that, and again, don't quote me on the numbers, but, if you hold a limited bull hunt for moose, of like 10, and again, how many thousands of people would be interested in putting their name in for a bull moose hunt just to draw 10 people? It's, I'm sure it would bring in money to the agency, and we can certainly use that to incorporate into some habitat or survey methodology. But, at the end of the day, you're bringing in 10 people to shoot a moose. You could probably sustain that. The chances of that moose population being okay and sustainable would probably be pretty high. But if you go to 20 bull moose, like the model showed, and this needs updated, but like it was like a 30% chance of driving the population to extinction.
Holy cow.
Just based on the herd dynamics and how the breeding has been observed in the past. So, I mean, you're playing with a really high percentage of variability with a really small number of allowing quotas. So it just hasn't been worth our effort to move forward with a moose hunt just yet, even though that was the original intent when we brought them back, over 30 plus years ago.
Do you think it'll get there at some point?
If you're asking me to put a crystal ball in, probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not.
Is that with just habitat and predator conflicts and stuff?
So I don't think they're habitat limited.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've got so much opportunity in big woods up there. Honestly, I think it's probably something more like climate driven. If I'm being completely honest with you, moose are designed to be a northern latitude species, right? They are meant to endure the hardest winters that you can possibly experience. They don't do as well in heat and summer. And that's why you don't see moose in like Kentucky. That's why you don't see moose in Texas. They're not equipped. They can handle the winters down there. They can't handle the summers. And our summers just seem to keep ticking up a little bit warmer. Like I think this week it was over 90 degrees in Marquette, which is our biggest city in the Upper Peninsula. So, those are not ideal conditions for moose. And we do have a climate person on staff. I think the projections are it's just going to continue to get warmer and warmer. So over time. So I think it's going to be a real challenge to get to like 1,000 moose or something like that. It could happen. And by the time it happens, I'll probably be dead and gone. I'll certainly be retired. So if I'm right or wrong, it won't matter. But I think it'll be a real challenge for them to get to that number.
Do you see, so with that, I guess, coming in, Chad, do you see any chance of those populations essentially migrating north? Or do you think they'll just kind of stick it out and over time the herd dynamics will just adapt to what they've got?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question, and I don't know the answer to that. I think it's a little bit more challenging with a place like the Upper Peninsula because you're surrounded by
Great Lakes,
expanses of the Lake Superior. Mm-hmm. So that becomes a little bit more challenging. If you talk about some place like Minnesota, where they can just continually creeping further north, that might be an option. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. That's a great question. I wish we could all look in the future and see what happen with some of that stuff.
How have the winters been over the last few years there?
Depends on where you're at, obviously. You know, and I'm speaking from a very limited time in Michigan. You know, I've only been up here 7 years. In southern Michigan, we've noticed a lot milder winters, just even since I've been here. And whether that's a trend or just a product of a small sample size, I don't know. But you know, we don't have any issues or concerns with like winter mortality with deer in certainly southern Michigan, and we haven't had any concerns even in the northern lower part of Michigan. The issue comes once you get into the upper peninsula, and so much of that revolves around snowfall, and the way I understand it, a lot of that revolves around whether or not Lake Superior freezes or not.
Right.
So if Lake Superior freezes, it's actually kind of better for snowfall, because it's not like those systems aren't picking up the moisture out of the lake and then depositing it as, you know, really high snowfalls over the UP, which that's, if you get, you know, more than about 100 days of a foot of snow on the ground, it really becomes detrimental for deer. And obviously the later in the spring that you have a severe winter event, that's the one that's going to be your deer killer, and specifically your like fawn and yearling killer.
Do they still have wintering yards up there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's one thing that I think a lot of people in most of the whitetail range are not familiar with. I mean, obviously people are supplemental feeding, or they got food plots, or they're leaving crops standing, but like to have literally locations, wintering yard locations where these deer are kind of flocking into or herding into, you know, to feed.
Yeah, the Upper Peninsula is really unique, and this is something that, you know, again, with my limited time in Michigan, I haven't seen this change as much as people are telling me, but there's a lot of people that have adopted supplemental feeding in the Upper Peninsula. I mean, it literally millions of dollars goes into the Upper Peninsula and putting out hay bales and whatnot. And it's not been fully studied yet, but there is at least some interest in that. That's disrupting some of the migratory pathways, because deer aren't going to their traditional deer yards. They're just holing up around a community or a couple houses that are just putting out a ton of food. And, you know, I think the concern becomes if you do that for 10 to 15 years, and, you know, which isn't much for somebody living in a house, obviously, but that's obviously a lot of generations of deer. Maybe you lose some of that institutional knowledge of the migratory pathways. And then what if that person stops feeding?
Yeah.
You know, do those deer, are they able to, you know, go back to those traditional deer yards where they had natural forage? And I don't know if we know that answer yet. So that's a recent change that's happened up there that a lot of people are adopting, whether it's to get deer through the winter, or, you know, just to view them. And it's interesting to see what the long-term impacts of that will be.
And I mean, have you guys had to get involved in that from a CWD aspect yet?
Yeah. So obviously when we found our first case of CWD, we have a baiting and feeding ban up in that area. We did not make it like peninsula wide. We kind of cut out like basically a 10-mile radius essentially, and saying you can't do that. And obviously that was an area that is pretty mild winters, pretty heavily agricultural. So you don't really have too much pushback in that area, other than the people that are still rely on baiting and like to bait, that just are happy to break the law to do that. But not as much pushback on that, but it's one of the concerns, right? Because you're going from, you know, parts of the UP probably have less than 5 deer per square mile. I mean, there are really low numbers of deer, and that's just a sort of an estimate based on some of the harvest numbers that come in. But those deer are migrating into areas and deer yards where their densities are going to be bumped up a lot more. And if you're putting feed out, and, you know, if you get one of those deer into a deer yard, and it's not just like deer coming from one area into that yard, that deer yard is utilized from deer from different parts of the peninsula. And then in the spring comes and they all sort of go back in their own way. You can easily see how if the disease gets introduced in one of those deer yards,
it's gonna spread fast.
How all of a sudden it just spreads out throughout the entire peninsula. So it's obviously a concern and a focal point of some of our conversations up there.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah, it's interesting when you start to think that kind of the evolution even of the hunter, not just in Michigan, but across the country. But you're getting a lot more people that are looking at more than just being a good hunter and out there harvesting deer to now like growing deer and supplementally feeding deer to keep them around or to provide extra nutrition through, wintertime or even the summer and stuff. When you kind of think about Michigan, at least for me, like I always think kind of the old days of like the buck pull and, guys just out killing deer, right? Have you seen that even in your 7 years there evolve to where are people trying to grow big deer, like big bucks in Michigan?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's so there's a lot of hunters that are really passionate about it. So we have part of our state that has antler point restrictions. So we've got, and obviously I'd say that's not necessarily designed to get deer to like 3 or 4 or 5 years old where they're really maximizing their antler growth. It's really to protect them through their first year and get them to their second year. And that's what it does really well. And hopefully I think a lot of hunters that are really passionate about antler point restrictions, hope that momentum continues, that like once you start seeing a lot more 2.5-year-olds that then again, you try to keep focusing on that maybe 3.5-year-old point. So it's a change. But the one thing about Michigan is really interesting is that, you've got all kind of hunters. You've got the ones that are absolutely passionate about, shooting a big 3.5, 4.5, 5.5-year-old buck, which they're here, but they're really hard to find. It's probably a lot like still even Pennsylvania with just the sheer hunter numbers that we have.
Yep.
And then you've got a lot of hunters, probably a lot more with more of a traditional mindset that they're happy with the first buck that they see and just, proud as anything to be able to put a 6-inch 4-point on a buck pole and hang out with it. And they're cool with that. And I think it's great that we can have that level of diversity within our hunting public, that people can take joy out of different things while deer hunting. I think the problem comes when, hunters are looking down on other hunters for getting joy out of something that they wouldn't get joy from themselves.
Well, I think that's hard. And, we look at it here in this state, Michigan, Wisconsin, all these states that just have large hunting numbers relative to the amount of deer habitat or deer hunting space in the state, and we talked about this with the Game Commission, but like you can't do something on a statewide basis that is literally to say, hey, we're going to try to get all these deer to 3, 4, and 5 years of age, like all these bucks are there, because it's just the community, the hunting community is so big that, number one, from an education standpoint, I mean, I look at states like Mississippi that have put in, inside spread or main beam restrictions in it instead of points, just because they're trying to make sure that they're not harvesting the better quality 1-year-olds. And, the amount of education that has to go into that to the hunting public in order for them to feel confident with that is just, it's mind-blowing to me. But in a lot of those states in the South, like those guys were already trying to harvest, 2 and 3-year-old bucks. Like they weren't used to shooting the first one-horn spike that comes through, in a herd of 50 deer, which in Michigan and Pennsylvania they are. So I think it is interesting. Have you guys, I guess, as you kind of look at the antler restriction process and stuff, I know here in Pennsylvania, it has seemed that even though there was so much, pushback at the beginning, this change, this antler restrictions, these increased antlers harvest, here we are almost 20 years later, people are seeing the biggest bucks they've ever seen in the state. And not only that, I would say your average hunter is seeing and probably killing bucks that they would have never have killed 20 years ago. Yeah. And it started to bring that group or that community together. Yes, there's still people, and Jared and I are one. I'm like, I hope every 2 or 3-year-old buck that I see that's a great one on the mountain makes it to 4 and 5. It's just not the case. Last year, 4 of the 3-year-olds I was watching all got killed in rifle season. It's just how it is. You can't do anything about it. But I think ultimately you're starting to bring that community at least a little bit tighter to where it's like, I saw a bunch of young bucks, but like I didn't shoot those. And mainly in the archery community, I guess. It looks like Pennsylvania has actually been increasing in archery hunters.
Nice.
I don't know if that's a trend that you guys are seeing in Michigan or not.
We haven't seen any decline in our archery participation. I think that's the best way to see it. So it's not necessarily increasing, but it's plateaued for, over 10 years now.
Wow.
And I think a lot of that is probably the allowance of crossbow in the early archery season that made it just a lot more accessible for folks. And as our hunting public gets older rather than younger, I think it's just a really nice time of the year to be out and sort of get a jump start on focusing on that buck you've been seeing all summer long. Whereas, you look at our firearm hunter numbers, those numbers have been in pretty steady decline over time. Our archery numbers have been really rock solid. And we had another great archery season last year. I think our archery harvest was up almost 20% last year.
Wow. Very cool.
So, getting back to your APR thing. We've seen the exact same thing. We've heard the exact same thing. Like, the hunters are pretty happy once it gets installed. Like, so to get APRs installed in Michigan, it's, certainly we could just make the recommendation, like, this is what we're going to do statewide, sort of like the Gary Alt technique in PA. And this is what we're going to do. And this is the communication piece. But how we've adopted it is basically, if an individual organization comes forward in anywhere between probably a 3 and 10 county area or DMU or deer management unit area and says, we'd like to have antler point restrictions. We basically say, you fund a survey and we'll run it and administer it. And if it gets, historically it was 66% support. So basically like a super majority, that number has changed to 60% support. We will propose it to our Natural Resources Commission for adoption. And that way it sort of protects everybody. And so knowing that it's like, this is really wanted by a lot of the hunters in this area. So the last time, and then in 5 years, we'll revisit it and see if the level of support is the same or exceeds. So we've got 12 counties, it's actually 13 counties in the northwest part of Michigan, but 12 were a part of this one APR initiative, over a decade ago. And they got through, they got like 66 or 67% support. We implemented APRs and we resurveyed them a couple years ago. And it was like 76% support for maintaining the APR regulation. So hunters, once it was in, they loved it. One of the challenges, people can't get that level of support at 60% in other parts of the state. So we haven't adopted it just yet in those areas.
And I assume that's kind of cultural based. Like I would assume like in the UP, like it's just that rich deer hunting tradition of camps and buck pools, and they don't care about killing big deer.
So the UP is a little bit different. So I don't know if you pick up a Michigan Hunting and Trapping Digest, you'll look at our regulations, like what the hell, but because it's kind of like a patchwork of things. So in Michigan, the UP is different. I said in many ways, but in our buck regulations too. So you can buy a single buck tag or what we call a combination buck tag. So basically, when you buy your license, you opt into a 1 buck pathway for the season or a 2 buck pathway for the season. And in most parts of the state, it's not a big deal. We just require that in most areas, your second buck have 4 points to a side. Basically, it basically prevents people from shooting 2 yearling bucks in most cases. In the UP, they passed a regulation years ago that if you buy a single buck tag, you can basically shoot any buck. A 3-inch spike is fine for those people that want to do that. And if you buy the combo license, which is your 2 buck, you're playing both antler point restrictions. So for your first tag, 3 points on the side. For your second tag, 4 points on the side. So it's really different. So and that's one of the things that we hear a lot about, and is confusing with some of the deer regulations, especially the buck management regulations in Michigan, is you can go across 4 or 5 counties and get 4 or 5 different buck regulations while you have the same tag in your pocket. So it's a real challenge and something we've identified and tried to change. But once it becomes culturally ingrained in hunters, it's really hard to make that change.
Yeah, do you see a decent amount of success for 2 buck tags filled?
It's about 5 to 6% of our hunters take 2 bucks.
That's probably better than I thought it would be.
Yeah. It's usually fluctuates between 4 and 6%, and that's an estimate that pretty much holds true every year.
Huh. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I have to imagine that even with the habitat that's different and being big woods in the UP, like with lower deer numbers and stuff, and just remote forest in a lot of the area, you probably get some just big old mature bucks that are up in that UP, just buried in that forest land.
Yeah, if you I mean, parts of our like we have what's called the Keweenaw Peninsula, which is sort of like just an offshoot of the UP that just goes right up into Lake Superior. It's absolutely beautiful if you've ever been there, and that's sort of like your launching point if you ever want to get to like Isle Royale National Park out in the middle of Superior. Fantastic area, but that place has a tremendous reputation for having really good bucks. Not a lot of deer necessarily, but really good bucks. And not many people, it's because not many people go there or hunt there, because they'll easily get, I think 200 to 300 inches of snow in the summer, and winter goes from November through April easily. So just not many people live up there, but the deer that are up there carve out a little niche for themselves, and they can get some age on them. They can get some size.
That's really cool. It really sounds like the UP is a lot like Maine in some cases. Like you hear moose and
Willie goes up to the UP every year.
Yeah,
and it doesn't sound like because the deer hunting is any good, but it's just been going there for so long, and it sounds pretty treacherous. Like he'll go out and sit for a week, and like if he sees a deer, he shoots it.
Huh. Interesting.
I don't know which part, but
real similar sort of. Yeah, I mean, even along the coast, especially along the Superior coast, just a lot coast, a lot of like spruce, pines, rocky, boulders.
They're
so,
big,
I
like
think
paper companies is where he's at. They own like big timber forests.
Interesting.
Yeah, a lot of similarities with something like Maine.
I know years ago, one of my family members lived in the southern peninsula of Michigan, and they said that like during like opening day deer season, you could like drive up the highway and there'd be like apple stands and stuff like along the road. Like you just pull over and like buy like a bushel of apples and go out and like dump it in the woods. Just for baiting.
Interesting.
It's crazy.
Yeah, they still have, even though we have a baiting ban in our lower peninsula because of both TB and CWD.
They still do it.
You can go to most gas stations and pick up a bag of carrots or sugar beets.
I'm pretty sure that's an apple tree, right? Yeah. So that's a coniferous.
It's a carrot tree.
That's where those apples came from for sure.
I'm
sure I didn't.
I'm pretty sure they came. I don't know where they came from. They just popped out of nowhere.
These are galas.
Well, I mean, like I think Pennsylvania and Kentucky, you guys have been killing some pretty big bull elk, though.
Yeah, we do pretty well on our elk, and we don't have any limits. I mean, we only have, I think of those 260 licenses I said, I think it's only like 60 are for bulls, and we basically call it an any elk license. So if someone wants to drop off and get a cow, they're welcome to do that under that license. But if you get any elk license, you best get a guide, know what you're doing, and get a bull, because it's literally a once in a lifetime experience. So they usually hold out for something that's pretty good. And last year I was doing some elk check, because we do our elk check in the field, and the one elk I checked was I think it was a 6x7, just an absolute stud. And the guy was just over the moon about it. It was just a beautiful.
Are there any kind of antler restrictions on the elk?
Nope. They can do whatever they want, because it's a once in a lifetime thing. Yeah. Most hunters are looking for something a little bit nicer, and most hunters, we have almost 100% success rate on our bull elk draws, because there's so few and it's so rare that basically people do everything in their power to make sure that they're going to be successful. But you do get guys that go out and shoot like a little 3x3 or something like that, and they're super happy with it because it's the first elk they've ever gotten or something. And again, that's cool too. But
are there archery seasons for elk?
No, it's any weapon. So we don't separate it by archery or firearms. So if someone wants to go out and attempt to take an elk with their archery, with archery equipment on their tag, they're welcome to do that. And I'm certain that it's been done and some people have tried, but by the time you get a Michigan elk tag, you're pretty much like, how can I be successful? And that's typically the mindset. Not saying it's like that for everybody, but we do not have separate seasons for equipment use or weapons.
How long is the season?
We've got 2 seasons, and you're drawn for one or the other. The first one is sort of our fall season, and it's a 12-day season. But it's broken up over 3-4 day like weekends essentially. So you got like a 4-day period to hunt. It's like a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday type thing, and then you can recoup or get back to work if you need to, and then go out again. So, and that's the season when obviously that's where there are ruts going on, and that can make for some really incredible hunting. And then we've got a December season that is 9 days long. So it's basically 2 weekends with the week in between, the work week in between. And we actually get higher success rate for hunters in the second season, the winter.
Yeah.
And that's your snow season usually, where you've got
foliage on the trees.
I'm sorry, what?
No foliage on the trees. You got a rifle and pick them off.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're obviously in really big groups at that point. You can pick one out and just go with it. And the guides up there do a really good job. They have relationships with landowners that they procure access to, and do a lot of times patterning either herds or certain specific elk. So it's a scene, man. They even have an elk pole. So you talked about a buck pole on the opening day of.
It must be a hell of a tree to hold those things up.
It's pretty impressive. Yeah, it's something to see.
That's really cool. Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of that tradition that kind of just continues to entrench itself in, certain states. And it's definitely, changed or, some might say decreased, but it's changed over time for sure in terms of those deer camps and how people have treated it. But it still exists. I mean, those kind of things are what, truly a conservation success, right? To see elk and have a huntable herd and have such a high success rate, but ultimately it's just it's a really cool thing that's probably going to start building a tradition over time for, most of these people, that have been able to draw a tag or like I put in for Pennsylvania and Kentucky pretty much every year. Odds of me drawing for either of them, not good, but like, why not? You know,
it's like $10.
Yeah. Just never know when you're going to get pulled on it.
It's like a lottery ticket, right? I mean, if it doesn't work, you're out maybe $10, $15. It's only a $5 application in Michigan. So it's
I wish it was a scratch off. Dude. Like I could just scratch it and I'm like, damn it, not again.
No, you don't. Margie somebody bought her lottery tickets for her birthday.
Scratch offs?
Oh, those are the stupidest thing. Like, it really is a tax on stupid people.
Oh, people love that stuff.
It's not fun. Like, I sat there for 10 minutes just like scraping these things off, and I was like, okay, I won $15.
I don't even have a quarter
they cost
anymore.
$25.
I'm like using my fingernail.
I use my knife.
Just like cut right through.
Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy. I think, Chad, one of the things that I was kind of interested from, and it's just as we kind of start to evaluate like all these different states and what people are doing from a deer herd management perspective, it's interesting to me that a state like Michigan that has a very, call it dense hunting population, has the ability to even offer a 2-buck pathway in a season, right? Because whether we think about Ohio or Indiana or Kentucky or Pennsylvania, like all 1-buck states, right? And it just, who knows? And again, if we're looking at that 5 to 6%, but obviously, like there has to be enough confidence in the herd and the model that you guys have to be able to say, like, hey, if for some crazy reason, like we had a 15% success rate on 2 bucks, like the herd can withstand it. It's not going to be detrimental and stuff. And there will be outliers like that. There always is in data. 2020 might have been an outlier like that. So I guess from that standpoint, like, what are you guys thinking? And part of this is tying back to having data that like is literally just kind of coming out now from last season. But, is it the trends that you guys are looking at from year over year that you're confident enough in those trends to be able to say, hey, there could be some outliers. Maybe it's a bad winter in the UP. Maybe people were more successful with $2, that you're able to stay fairly consistent in your recommendations?
Yeah. We put a lot of emphasis on the data that we have and the trends that we see. Mm-hmm. And, we base that off of multiple years of data. So whether it's success rate, number of individual deer that are being harvested by a hunter, our overall hunter numbers in general. And then obviously just what we know about deer biology. So, what you're asking about sort of dovetails really nicely into some of the bigger changes that we've made recently. So throughout now, starting in the lower peninsula, so let me back up. I guess even as recently as last year, we had specific antlerless licenses tied to deer management units. So, if you're in like the county I'm living in right now is Ingham County, we had an antlerless quota for private land in Ingham County. We had a antlerless quota for public land in Ingham County. If I go 7 miles up the road into another county, say Clinton County, that's another tag. That's a Clinton County public land tag or a Clinton County private land tag, and they're not like reciprocal at all. So we've got over 100 different types of tags that are out there for antlerless deer. And, if you have a farm in one county and a cabin in another county, and you want to just hunt does in each of those areas, you would need 2 different types of antlerless tags. So it became confusing. It became almost cost prohibitive for a lot of hunters to start buying multiple tags where they really just want to shoot a deer, or maybe 2 deer, but they have to buy like all these different tags. So starting this year, we're going to what we're calling a universal antlerless license, where you just get an antlerless license, and then you can go anywhere where it's open, essentially. And then the other thing is and this is some of our hunters are going to cringe about this, but we've actually eliminated quotas in a lot of our lower peninsula counties. So you buy a tag, you go hunt, and we would not recommend that or have made those changes unless we were confident in terms of, the numbers that we were seeing. So perfect example, Michigan has lost over a 250,000 hunters in the past 20 years. That's a huge number. And I don't know where other states are at with that. I think they're on the same trajectory, but maybe a different scale. But, back in 2000, we had over 800,000 deer hunters in Michigan. Now we're in the 550 to 600,000 range.
Wow. And maybe they're just not buying tags because they can't figure it out. Yeah, it's too confusing.
Yeah.
Our regulations have been so
No, they're out there. Yeah.
So when you say that removal of quota, Chad, are you saying like if I buy that tag, and let's say I'm in one of these, like, can I shoot as many does as I want with that tag?
We have individual. So you have an individual number of deer that you can take, but even that we set at 10.
Wow.
So it's a huge number, right?
Well, it works to somebody's benefit, like Jared, because like one of the things. So Jared lives in PA, family farms in Ohio, actively managing 1,000 acres. But as a non-resident, it costs them $75 a doe tag, and it's 76. like I need to shoot 10 does. I'm not gonna go spend $1,000 to go shoot 10 does.
Yeah,
and there's no other option.
Wow.
Yeah,
poach.
Well, or you can get crop damage tags.
But I mean, it is.
But I couldn't
if
I owned it as a non-ret. I don't know if I could do that. It's just because my parents live there.
So you're handcuffed into what you can do.
Yeah, well, I mean, every state is different. You just operate within the structure they've got set up.
Absolutely, and some states do the DMAP course where you've got strict limits on things, but if you are experiencing problems, you can apply for these DMAP permits, and I think each state's a little different, and some might be sold, some might be given away. It might be a little bit different. But we sit there and look at the data, and we've got less than 1% of our hunters take like 4 or more antlerless deer.
And those are probably the ones who are like actively managing, I would assume.
It's actively managing. Yeah. I mean, it's only like, it's like 5% take 2 antlerless deer or more. Like it's a really small number. And you think, you go through it. I mean, maybe your immediate audience, because I mean, it takes a lot for a really passionate deer hunter to tune into like a specific deer hunter podcast, or, do like a lot of, summer, food plots and stuff like that. But there are a lot of hunters out there that are just sort of buying their tag, a couple of days before the season started. And that's fine. It's important to them, but none of those hunters are going to go out and shoot like 3, 4, 5 deer. Like they're cool with one.
Yeah.
And they might not shoot one at all.
Yeah.
And the people that are really into managing deer, there's a really good chance that they're not going to shoot more than 4 or 5, especially if it's in a really high density area. They've got a big family to feed or give away. We just look at the data and say, what are some of the limitations that are leading us to hold back on people not being able to pursue an antlerless deer when we have 250,000 fewer hunters in the woods today than we had last year or 20 years ago. And so I told you how our antlerless harvest last year was up like 29%.
Yep.
That was as good as we've done since 2011.
Wow. And that's simply because hunters are falling off the map.
Hunters are falling off that map. We made a lot of, that's the long-term trend and the long-term reason why. It's not necessarily because our deer population's crashing. We're still shooting we still shoot over 200,000 bucks
right
in Michigan. We still have places that, and when you double into the fact that so much of the Midwest is private land also, a lot of guys are, and even women hunters, they're not going to shoot a lot of deer. So it's sort of a change that we've made recently, that, the quota system that we had in place was sort of an artifact of, like the 70s and 80s. And, as the population was booming and we had a lot of hunters in the landscape, as we lose 250,000 hunters from our profile, we have to make some changes to hit the antlerless harvest that we need. The alternative point of that is, if your state was to suddenly gain 250,000 deer hunters,
right,
you would have to make regulation changes, because that's a big change. We can't do things the way we've done it in the past.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that we looked at, again, kind of hovering on 2020, is like, yes, there were new hunters. Will they stick around? Who knows, right? We'll know in 21 how many stick around, but there was this big influx. How did that affect harvest? How did that affect the herd? Obviously, you guys saw increase. Pennsylvania, for the first time in a long time or ever, we had multiple Sundays that we were able to hunt, including one rifle Sunday. So how did that increase harvest? And so it's interesting when you start to think these trends, and there's always like one data point. 1 year is not enough to make a decision on, but like, what does it do in year 2 and year 3? And then how are you making decisions from there? And so, yeah, I think to your point, it's interesting to see how you guys are doing it. Are you seeing populations in the southern peninsula increase in a lot of areas?
So yeah, all the trends that we have in almost all of our southern counties are showing increases, whether it's success rates, harvest. Deer vehicle collisions isn't really the most reliable data, but it's something that you look at, just to sort of look as a trend. Crop damage complaints, just the number of complaints that are coming in. So when we talk with our biologists, who are, a lot better on the ground and know their area a lot better than I do, most of them are coming forward and saying, our herd is stable to increasing. There might only be 1 or 2 counties that are stable to decreasing type,
wow,
category. So it becomes a real challenge, especially when you project what hunter numbers are going to look like over the next 10 to 20 years. So we're projecting to lose about 100,000 additional hunters over the next even 10 to 15 years. So, that means what we were managing for with 800,000 hunters, 20 years ago, and 30 years from that time, we're going to be asking them to take as many deer, if not more, with, almost half as many hunters. And that becomes a real management challenge for a lot of folks. And obviously there's a lot of habitat changes that are being different as well, but you're creating a lot more refuge as well. Like as neighborhoods start getting built up and, parcels become seemingly smaller and farms get sold off, there's a lot fewer hunters that are going to be on our landscape in the future than there are today. And we gotta use the hunters to manage our deer as much as we can. And the way to do that is to make it exciting for them too. So you have to have really good bucks on the landscape for them to be motivated and want to go out. But you also have to really focus on antlerless harvest as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things that I think we're going to see across the board continue to become more of an increasing privilege / responsibility on the hunters who are continuing to hunt and continuing to move forward to manage these populations. And there are definitely cases where, I mean, I love shooting does. I love having meat in the freezer, but there's also a ton of cases where I just don't want to shoot a doe. Like I'm out hunting a particular buck or looking for a buck. And so, to understand how to balance that time and those resources is going to be tough. And, how hunters are almost incentivized to go out and do that, I think is going to be really the trick to continuing to manage this stuff long term and to feel that sense of responsibility for, a statewide resource.
Yeah, no, I agree. And everybody's going to be a little bit different in their, how much time they have available. And I don't know any responsible or ethical hunter that's going to take more deer than they can utilize.
Right.
That just doesn't happen. But coming up with creative ways to get deer into some sort of, food distribution network, so there's a lot of really good, like Hunters for Hungry. We've got a Sportsmen Against Hunger sort of program here. Those are real avenues, not only to keep people hunting and kind of go above and beyond their freezer capacity, but, put hunters and hunting in a really positive light too, to, sort of, I mean, that's why hunters hunted to start with, right?
Sure.
It's like you bring food in and you share it within your community. And that's something that we should not lose sight of.
I think those are one of the programs that I know a lot of states do it really well. Some states don't do it very well at all. But like, at one time, I forget which state I was in, like I could kill a bunch of does, take them to a cooperative processor and just drop them off and walk away, right? Yeah. There was some in Pennsylvania, I think I got to pay 50% of it, which is tough because like I want to give it away. I want to donate it, but you're asking me to pay 50% of the fees, which aren't $30 anymore, right? They're $100, $110 to process a deer anymore. And so, it's those, I think, become some of the programs that, hopefully get more statewide support even from whether it's legislature or other funding sources to continue to, push people ahead to providing meat to needy families and stuff, because I think it is a huge source to bring hunting into a better light across the board.
Yeah. So actually some of my main hunting that I do now is archery hunting. And I can literally walk across my front lawn. I've got a really great neighbor on the other side of the property on the road that he lets me utilize his property for access. And then behind him is like this river corridor, and it's part of this urban archery program. And it's fantastic because, like, one, it's super close for me, but I can go out, shoot deer and really try to help the community out in terms of management of the local deer herd. And then we're required to give our first doe or first deer away, through this program. And in the township that I live in, the community that runs it has they erected a small walk-in cooler, and they've got a township official that picks the things up. That's
awesome.
Drives it to a processor that is part of this Sportsmen Against Hunger program. So all I have to do is shoot the deer, field dress it, and get it to the cooler, and then it goes other people. So it's an incredible program. It's been going on for now over 10 years, and they've made tweaks and changes every year since then. But it's really running well, and I like to point to it as sort of a model for how communities can sort of have hunting coexist with other recreation and still provide a service within the community. And
yeah, that's really cool. It also sounds like a killer corridor for buck movement in the rut.
It's fantastic. Yeah, I haven't seen any really nice bucks down there. I actually missed a 2.5-year-old last year. That probably would have been my biggest buck. It nicked a branch on the way on the arrow did. So that was kind of a bummer, but it was at least a clean miss. So it's a great spot, close to home. And deer I see deer every sit. So I need to do a better job of getting more deer on the ground, but that's more of an indictment on my abilities as a hunter than the program.
Well, it is crazy, man. It's, number one, we appreciate your time coming in and talking with us. For us, it's just kind of learning like how each state is so different. Yeah, we all kind of have the same goals from a deer hunting and management standpoint, and we're all passionate about it. And that's the thing that I think is really interesting is there are huge cultural differences across the board, but ultimately, like we love deer, we love deer management, we love deer hunting, and it's just making sure that people kind of realize that you may hear certain things out there and you don't hear them correctly, right? That's the biggest thing from an agency standpoint. And I know you've taken a further step, and we kind of talked about this before the podcast, but whether you want to call it your public figure page of Chad Stewart or not, like you've actually taken the step to have a public facing Facebook page that you use for outreach and communication on things that are going on with the DNR's deer and elk programs.
Yeah, and I do. So I've got a Facebook page. I've got a Twitter account. I feel like I'm too old for Instagram. I feel like I would just be like a creepy old dude hanging out on that profile. So I don't have one of those, but I kind of just view it as like an offshoot of some of the really great communication that, our agency does already. And it allows me an opportunity to interact with people on social media, because that's how information travels now. And I think it's really important to get your, as a biologist, to be out there and talking with people as much as possible. And it's really been difficult to do this past year. So the best way to do that, I think, is a lot through social media and communicate that way. That being said, you still got to take mental health breaks from social media, because it's...
Oh, dude, I can't even imagine. That's like Jared doesn't even like look at our YouTube comments for our podcast, let alone like what you probably get in Facebook comments when you say, "Hey, we're changing this regulation."
It's like it's ironic because people like friend you in Facebook, but man, some of the comments that come through are not.
You're not my friend.
Friendliest, yeah.
I stopped accepting friend requests like 2 years ago.
I thought we were friends.
I thought we were friends. Like, friends don't say this to friends. But I mean, dude, think about it. Like 20 years ago, when Gary Alt, drove across Pennsylvania and gave these speeches in high school gyms and stuff like that. Like the dude wore a bulletproof vest and was getting death threats to his family and stuff, and part of it was because I think there was this huge wall between the state agency and the public, and Gary decided to knock that down and said, like, no, I'll go out there and talk to these people. I'll tell them exactly what we're doing. And I think that's part of, even with what you're seeing in some of those things, like you're catching that because I think there's a lot of agencies and a lot of organizations out there that don't communicate to that general hunting public, so they just feel unheard, right? And they have to vent it somewhere.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I mean, Gary Alt, is a real innovator with the communication side of things, and I don't know if he gets enough credit as he probably deserves for a lot of that, because that had to be incredibly taxing on him personally, sure. Emotionally, his family, etc. But you're right, like so many times, and you're just considered like a bureaucrat within the agency or your state government. And, there's a lot of stigma associated with government right now. At the end of the day, like nobody got into this job to be like necessarily a government employee or like a figure. And you did it because you're passionate about wildlife, about deer, about management, and you want to talk about those things. And, you were formed that way through your upbringing with, hunting with your parent, your father, your friends, et cetera. And you pass that on to your kids. There's a lot of similarities between, an agency biologist and just a regular hunter. I think just the lens of how you're viewing things is very different. And a lot of those times, those differences can probably be broken down by simple communication. It's just really hard to do that when you've got this government wall around you. So to try to break that down, I think tries to build a lot more trust. it's a challenging uphill battle though to make those sort of amends, and it's not easy work, right? If it was easy, everybody'd be doing it.
Well, it's just an emotional topic because people, like, deer hunting is a hobby, but it's a life for a lot of people. It's what they have outside their family and work, and so they are so passionate about it, and anything you're passionate about, tends to come through. And when you talk about social media or whatever it is, like, the written word obviously always gets taken out of context. But it's so hard because these people are just, they love it and they want to be heard, and they feel like their voice doesn't matter. And when as a license holder that's funding these agencies, it definitely should.
Yeah, and that's the hardest part too, is so you love the passion that comes out from people, and that they're emotional and they want what's best for the herd too. And, obviously we want what's best for the herd too. Mm-hmm. So many times we hear, and especially in recent months, with this, oh, you're gonna kill all the deer, with the quota changes that you're making and stuff that we talked about. But like, we would not be making those changes if we weren't confident in the data that we're getting. And if we start to see a really dramatic turn of events, obviously we would make the change that reverses course in that. So I think it's so much, whether you're talking about wildlife or just anything else, there's so much to be said for just sitting down and understanding where people are coming from, their perspectives, and just having a really even keel, try to have an even keel conversation about the topics involved. And I think in most cases you'll find that there's a lot more similarities than differences in what the end goal is we're looking for.
Yeah, well, it's a start, man. I mean, just having that page out there and having some open communication lines and dialogues with them is a lot more than a lot of agencies and biologists are doing. So, kudos for you to try to take that step out there. I know you're a talker anyway, so you just it's just your step trying to be in the limelight again, Chad. I just don't get it, man.
Yeah, if I could figure out a way to put my face on a billboard, obviously I'd do that. You know me well.
Oh, it'd have so many bullet holes through it. It would be insane. Chad Stewart, Michigan deer biologist. Yeah. So, well, dude, we appreciate you coming on. It was good catching up with you. We need to do it more, and we appreciate you sharing some stuff about Michigan and the DNR, and hopefully a lot of people are listening to this. If anything, our big goal here is, just to have a little open mind from the listeners to hear from the biologist angle, from a state agency angle, and understand, like, you guys aren't bad guys. Like, you're not trying to do things to, like, ruin deer hunting. Like, your passions and your motivations are aligned with what theirs are. It's just sometimes maybe they don't have all the information to make those conclusions.
Sure.
So, well, cool, man. We appreciate you having you on, and we'll have to get you back in here as we get closer to hunting season, see how things are progressing.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate you having me, and you guys just keep doing what you're doing. You're killing it.
Appreciate it, Chad. Thanks, buddy.
See you, fellas.
See ya. Yeah. Good deal.
There you go.
Our Mevo died halfway through.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, we'll have to get that on the old chargeback. But it's just interesting when you kind of, like, I know it. Like, you could kill 2 bucks in Michigan. Like, I feel like they're just in line with what we are in Pennsylvania. Like, how can you be killing? Like, it just seems just so obscure to me that we do have more people hunting in Pennsylvania, not in Ohio, not in Kentucky, and I don't know. Like, I am a big fan of the single buck harvest because I do think it allows, at least for my goals, and I think your goals, of getting bucks to older age classes. But I don't know. I mean, I feel like some of these states just make the regulations so difficult, and it's like, man, at what point, like, to me, it sounds like Chad's basically saying, hey, listen, we trust you guys as hunters to go out and be responsible for what you kill and its effects on the resource, which maybe is giving them too much rope. I don't know.
I don't know.
Because, I mean,
I think I'm more confused by the state having had that conversation.
Yeah.
But yeah, it sounds like a shit show.
Well, I think it's just the way that
it seems very patchy. Like, there's just like there's like a lot of regulation in every different part of the state. Some of it has a lot of freedom, but it seems like it's almost more confusing to figure out which part of it you can do that in than the other.
Which I think is why they're going more universal. I think the big thing is
I think that would be to their benefit.
I mean, look at like how, and again, I know Pennsylvania, we didn't talk about it or we're trying to get the numbers, but like think about how they're doing the population estimates. It's July and they're just figuring out like what you're harvesting. And I get it. You're basing that off of all trends. And part of that, I want to be like, you know, shame on us as hunters for not like checking in our damn deer, you know?
Sure. But also shame on the state for having a pretty antiquated system.
For sure.
Like how easy would it be for me to, when I check my deer and throw the app up and say,
would it though? I mean, if you don't have service.
Yeah. When do we not have service though? We've got cell cameras about everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess I grew up in the days of like I would literally take a harvest report card out of the Hunter Digest and fill it out and send it in. And like nobody guilty of not turning it in myself, like just forgetting about it, like because it's whatever a week after I kill it.
You're under arrest.
Probably. Yeah, where's Matt when you need him? But
he's like, I've got the green shirt.
I got the green shirt. But like it is weird to just see like I don't know, just. I know it is a state-managed resource in talking about deer populations, but, like, everybody's doing it differently. Like, somebody has to have this thing figured out, right?
I almost thought about, like, Michigan could step in as, like, a plan B state to, like, big buck states, essentially to say, hey, listen, Iowa, Kansas, all these people you're turning away, like, let me step in and say, hey, you can come hunt here in Michigan. There's tons of us that didn't get drawn and stuff. So
yeah, it is.
If you need hunters, they're out there.
Well, and it is. I mean, I have seen bigger bucks being killed in Michigan for sure. In fact, I saw a couple like 190s or something this morning. I was looking at some forums on stuff. So I mean, it's like Pennsylvania. Like they're getting to the point where they're killing bigger deer. They're seeing bigger deer. I bet there's some giant bucks up in that UP just buried in there, just big old heavy monsters. But like. What's interesting about it is with the decrease of numbers, and again, this is where we can debate this all day long, but from a hunting standpoint, from a funding standpoint to the agency, hunter declines are not good, right? From a management or killing bigger bucks, less hunters, probably bigger bucks at some point, right? So it's a weird thing, and like, What is antiquated, I think, about the federal funding systems for monies going to the states because of hunting license sales is that it's based on purely like number of hunting license and like amount of public acreage and some other factors there. If hunting numbers are declining, like obviously I would happily pay more for a hunting license to make up those dollars. But the state's not going to get the federal credit that they would if they had 150,000 more hunters and I paid the same lower price.
Yeah.
So I think that's another system from a federal level of how these states are receiving funding that has to be addressed at some point because we're going to decline in hunter numbers. We are. It's going to keep going there. This 2020 false sense of growth is just stupid. Like,
yeah,
it's not going to happen again.
Yeah.
So, but I'll pay more money for my license, especially in my home state, or even Ohio's cheap out of state. Like, I'll pay more money for my hunting license, but the federal government should figure out how they're also going to pay more money because I paid more money. Not because we lost a hunter, they're not going to pay as much.
Agreed. Yeah, well, I think all government agencies would do well just to maybe not try to control the population of hunters so much as they would just kind of observe what's happening and promote the resources they do have and then adapt their...
I think Chad said it. I mean, best that I've heard it said from an agency standpoint is we know that numbers are going to decline. We have to figure out how the hunters that will be around are going to manage the herd like we did 20 years ago.
Agreed.
Nobody else is talking like that. Everybody else is saying, oh, let's look at R3, which I'm not saying is not important because it's critically important. But R3 is never going to backfill the loss that we're seeing. So what are states doing to adapt to what the new hunter numbers are going to be to manage the resource like it was 20 years ago?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, frankly, I'm in favor of less hunters, but I still want the same opportunities. So if we can find a way to make those two things happen.
Yeah. And right now, a state can't say that they want less hunters because...
Not that we want to actively reduce the number of hunters, but if the interest isn't
there... It's declining. We're aging population. It's declining. It's going to happen. At some point, it will stabilize.
Certainly, that's the case in the UP. Like, there's not good deer hunting up there, generally speaking. And so probably like the average age of the UP deer hunter is like 87.
Yeah, he's probably just like throwing an apple out his backyard and just like...
And I think it's probably fair to say that a lot of, archery... I think there's a group of people that are like taking big, let's call it trophy hunting deer. Like there's a group of people.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
And they're not going to the UP.
It's going to stabilize. At some point, like the numbers of in and out of the bigger hunting population will find a balance. And these, like Chad said, for the last 10 years, archery has been stable across the board. In Pennsylvania, it's actually increased. There will be a group of us that eventually stabilizes the numbers. Will they ever be like they were in the 90s? No, that's just how this whole evolution's happened. Yeah. But it will stabilize. What states have to start to figure out is how are we going to manage the populations with this lower number of hunters. And then number two is how are we going to get the dollars to be able to support wildlife management and conservation activity with that lower number of hunters. License increases help, but because federal tax dollars and stuff are kind of matched on number of hunters, that's a fault. It's an antiquated system. Yeah. Has to be changed. Change. I'm not Barack Obama. So. Well, we appreciate everybody listening to this episode of HUNTR Podcast with Chad Stewart from the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, talking about their deer, elk, and I didn't know they had moose, but that was cool too.
500 of them.
Yeah. Although they may not be there for long.
And we can't hunt them, so.
No, we can't hunt them. We can't even hunt the elk there.
Oh.
Yeah. They're like the polar bears. The climate is...
It's too hot.
Too hot. It is too hot. Too hot for me.
All right, man. Let's get some food.
Okay. We'll see you next time.
Later.
Take me